Alien girl returned the human's cracked compass, and inside it was something he never expected. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's return to our main character. The wind came in like a low, steady roar, pushing against Ethan Cole as if it had a personal grudge. It carried sand the color of copper and tiny ice crystals that stung his cheeks every time the gust shifted. The research outpost behind him was little more than a metal box anchored into the rock, humming under the strain of another incoming front. He crouched near a half-buried relay panel, trying to reseat a loose circuit. His gloves felt thick and clumsy in the cold, and when he leaned forward, something slipped from the inner pocket of his jacket. He caught the glint a fraction too late. The small brass compass tumbled from his fingers, bounced once on the metal framework, and slid straight into a narrow crack between two slabs of rock. Great, he muttered, breath fogging in the frigid air. He reached for it, but the wind shoved him again, harder this time. His footing broke. A sudden downdraft pushed him sideways, scraping his shoulder against the panel and sending a sharp jolt through his arm. The relay beeped in protest. Ethan steadied himself and tried again, stretching his hand deep into the crevice, but the compass had fallen beyond reach. He exhaled slowly, letting the disappointment sink in. The compass wasn't new. Its surface was scratched from years of fieldwork, and the front glass had cracked recently during a rough landing. But his mother had given it to him before his first off-world assignment. "So you always know where home is," she'd said. Out here, where storms could distort navigation and visibility dropped to almost nothing, the compass wasn't useful. But it mattered. The sky above him flickered with pale blue ribbons, charged particles reacting to the magnetic storms that drifted through the region at dusk. They lit up the desert floor in soft pulses that made the shadows stretch and bend. Ethan brushed the dust off his jacket, gave the cracked crevice one last look, and turned back toward the shelter. A faint crunch broke through the wind. He paused. The landscape was empty except for the shifting dunes and the rusted skeletons of old survey posts. The sound came again, lighter, too rhythmic to be the wind. Ethan frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone, and the nearest team was nearly 20 miles out. He took a cautious step toward the noise. The wind thinned for a heartbeat, and in that brief hush, he saw it. A silhouette standing at the edge of the ridge. Tall, slender, unmoving. The fading blue light traced the edges of a figure with smooth skin that shimmered like polished stone. Ethan blinked, unsure if the storm was playing tricks on his eyes. But then the figure shifted, and even from a distance he could see the glow of bioluminescent markings along her cheekbones. An Arvan, a native of this region, and she was holding something small in her hand. Ethan's pulse picked up. The figure, no, the girl, tilted her head, as if studying him. The wind carried her outline in and out of clarity, but her posture stayed the same, calm, patient, deliberate. Ethan took one tentative step toward her, and the object in her hand caught a glint of stormlight. It was small, round, brass. His compass. She had found it, or taken it, or both. He wasn't sure which possibility made less sense. He opened his mouth to speak, but the wind shoved past them again, swallowing the words before they left his throat. The girl didn't move. She simply waited, holding his cracked compass between her fingers as if it were something fragile, something she understood mattered. And Ethan felt, without knowing why, that this was only the beginning. Ethan stood still, the cold brushing across his ears in thin, brittle whispers as the Arvan girl remained at the ridge, framed by the dim blue shimmer of the drifting stormlight. The compass rested in her open palm, its cracked glass catching each pulse of light like a tiny lantern. For a moment Ethan thought she might vanish if he blinked, another mirage carved by exhaustion and too many long shifts in the field. But she was real. The scrape of sand at her feet was real. The gentle rise of her shoulders as she breathed was real. He lifted his hands slowly, palms visible, a gesture meant to bridge the distance without assuming anything. The girl's eyes, bright as polished silver, tracked the motion with a steady calm that made the wind seem louder in contrast. That belongs to me, Ethan said, speaking clearly so the wind would not swallow his words. He nodded toward the compass, not daring to step closer yet. She lowered her gaze to the object as though confirming its identity. When she looked back up, the question in her expression was quiet but unmistakable. Why did this matter to him? A soft tremor in the air made her shift her stance, not in fear, but in consideration. Then she moved. Not quickly, not as a challenge. Just a single, careful step down the ridge. The bioluminescent markings along her arms brightened with the movement, glowing faintly like threads of pale moonlight. Ethan felt his weight ease off his heels, almost an involuntary response. She was approaching. The space between them shrank from 50 feet to 40, then 30, her stride smooth and almost silent on the sand. When she stopped again, he saw the compass more clearly. The crack across its glass ran like a thin white scar. She lifted it slightly, as if offering it to him, but kept her distance. Ethan stepped forward, but only halfway. The wind surged again and pushed a scatter of sand across their feet. She reacted with a small tilt of her head, studying him with an intensity that was not threatening, only curious. He realized she was watching how he moved, how he breathed, how he placed his weight. She was learning him the way field biologists learn a new species, but gentler. Ethan cleared his throat. Thank you for finding it. The girl glanced at the compass again, then back to him. Her voice, when it came, was soft and resonant, like it traveled through the stormlight before reaching him. It was caught, she said. I freed it. He blinked. Her standard was accented but clear, shaped around vowel sounds that carried a melodic quality. You freed it, he repeated, realizing she meant she had pulled it from the crevice. She nodded once. Her tone was matter of fact, not proud, simply truthful. She extended her hand a little more, offering the compass fully now. Ethan approached slowly, sand crunching under his boots. When he reached her, he paused again, giving her a moment to read his intention. She held steady. Up close, her skin had a smooth, mineral sheen, like stone warmed by sunlight. The faint glow along her jawline flickered softly with each breath. He reached for the compass, careful not to brush her fingers. But she shifted her grip at the last second so that the object rested more securely against her palm, guiding it toward him in a steady arc. His hand closed around the cool brass frame. For a heartbeat their eyes met, and something in her expression softened. Recognition, maybe, or simply understanding that the object meant more than its function. A distant rumble echoed across the plain, signaling another wave of the storm rolling in. The girl turned her head toward the sound, then looked back at him. Shelter, she said quietly. You should go. Ethan tightened his fingers around the compass. What about you? Her markings pulsed once, subtle but clear. The storm does not harm my kind. She stepped back, almost gliding, the stormlight reflecting across her shoulders like water. Ethan watched her retreat a few feet, then pause again, as if weighing something unspoken. Ethan, he said, tapping his chest lightly. My name is Ethan. She considered the sound. Then, with a soft nod, she replied, Sarai. The wind rose again, swirling around them in a cold, electric rush. When Ethan glanced down at the compass and looked back up, Sarai was already ascending the ridge, her silhouette melting into the blue shimmer as though the storm itself had claimed her shape. Ethan reached the shelter just as the first wave of the storm struck the plain with a low, rolling hum that made the steel frame tremble. He closed the door behind him and let the warm air wash over his face, thawing the sting left by the cold. He held the compass in both hands, turning it slowly, watching the cracked glass catch the artificial light like a fractured sunrise. His breath steadied. The room smelled faintly of metal and recycled air, the usual scent of field outposts, but tonight it felt different. It felt almost quiet, despite the storm outside. He placed the compass on the small metal table near the workstation and brushed the dust from his jacket, letting his muscles relax for the first time in hours. He could still hear Sarai's voice in his mind, carrying that soft melodic tone when she had spoken her name. Sarai. He repeated it under his breath, letting the sound sit in the air for a moment. He replayed the encounter, the way she studied him, the way she handled the compass like it had meaning she did not quite understand, the way she walked back into the storm as if it welcomed her. He turned on the monitor at the workstation. Static flickered for a second before the local sensors loaded. Wind speed accelerating, temperature dropping another few degrees, visibility near zero. He glanced toward the window. The world outside shifted under the blue glow of storm particles, waves of light traveling across the dunes like migrating fireflies. He wondered if Sarai was still out there, or if her kind had shelters of their own beneath the ridges. He had heard stories, of course, bits and pieces from other researchers about the Arvin, but none of it ever sounded like the person he met. Curiosity nudged him toward the door more than once, but he stayed inside. She had told him to seek shelter. She had not asked. She had known. Still, he found himself checking the window every few minutes, half expecting her silhouette to reappear at the ridge. The storm moved in pulses, each one casting shifting shadows across the interior walls of the shelter. Ethan sat on the edge of the small cot, elbows on his knees, and studied the compass again. A thin line of dust clung to the crack. He rubbed it clean carefully. "You just keep getting yourself into trouble," he murmured. As if in response, the wind outside shifted, and for a moment the low hum softened. Something tapped lightly against the outer hull of the shelter. Ethan's head lifted. It was not the sharp rattle of sand. It was softer, almost intentional. He stood and crossed to the door slowly. His hand hovered over the control panel, listening. Another tap. Deliberate. Rhythmic. Ethan opened the door just a few inches, enough for a sliver of cold air to rush in. The stormlight spilled across the threshold in pale blue waves. At first he saw nothing. Then his eyes adjusted. A shape stood just beyond the edge of the light. Calm. Steady. Familiar. Sarai. Her. Markings glowed faintly, the color shifting with the storm like breathing embers. She did not step forward. She simply waited, her posture composed, as if she had been standing there for some time. Ethan pushed the door wider, the warm air behind him meeting the cold outside in a thin swirl. He felt his heartbeat settle into something quieter, something steady. Sarai, he said softly, the name carrying more easily now that the wind had calmed. She inclined her head, a small motion, but one that held the weight of intention. Her voice reached him through the gentle rush of air. "You should not be alone in this storm." Ethan blinked, the words sinking deeper than he expected. Not a warning, not an order, something closer to concern. He stepped aside, allowing the light from the shelter to reach her more clearly. The glow along her arms brightened in response, reflecting the warmth she approached. And as she stepped toward him, quiet as a passing breeze, Ethan realized that the compass might not be the only thing he had found tonight. If Ian stepped back just enough for Sarai to enter, though it felt less like inviting someone inside, and more like allowing the storm to release her. The warm air wrapped gently around her as she crossed the threshold, the markings along her arms shifting from cool blue to a softer shade, like the glow of distant starlight easing into dawn. She paused a few feet inside, her gaze roaming the compact shelter with quiet calculation. There was no fear in her posture, only observation, as if she were mapping the space not with suspicion but with curiosity. Ethan sealed the door behind them, muting the storm to a low vibrating hum that traveled faintly through the walls. The sudden calm inside made the moment feel suspended, as though the entire shelter were holding its breath alongside him. Sarai stood near the center of the room, her presence strangely natural despite the stark contrast of her luminous skin against the metal surroundings. Ethan watched her take in the soft light fixtures, the small generator humming in the corner, the cot, the scattered tools. When her eyes landed on the compass resting on the table, something in her expression shifted, subtle as a change in temperature. "You keep it close," she said. Ethan nodded. "I do." She tilted her head, studying the faint reflection of the light on the cracked glass. "Does it still show direction?" "Not out here," Ethan replied. "The storms interfere with anything that uses magnetic fields. It is basically just a piece of brass now." She absorbed that quietly, turning her attention back to him. "Then why does it matter?" The question was not skeptical. It was gentle, as if she were trying to understand a word she had heard for the first time. Ethan drew in a breath and leaned lightly against the table. "Because it belonged to someone important. Someone who wanted me to find my way." Sarai looked down at her hands, running her fingertips along the faint glow markings as though considering his words. "In my culture," she said softly, Objects without use are released back to the land. Released? Sarai nodded. Returned to where they came from. A way to honor the cycle. Ethan considered that. I guess humans hold on to things a little differently. Her eyes lifted, silver bright and focused. Because you remember through them. The simplicity of her observation struck him more deeply than he expected. Yeah, he said. I guess that is part of it. She moved closer to the window, her movements smooth and unhurried. The storm outside painted shifting blue patterns across her skin. She raised a hand toward the glass, not touching it, merely sensing the energy vibrating through it. Your storms are loud, she murmured. The Arvan storms speak softly. Ethan stepped near her, leaving a respectful space between them. I did not know the Arvan lived so close to this region. Her shoulders rose in the faintest hint of a breath. We do not stay in one place. We travel along the old paths. We watch the wind. We listen to the ground. This is our way. Her gaze drifted back to him. But tonight the wind carried your presence. Ethan blinked. My presence. Your worry, she corrected gently. You lost something that held weight in your spirit. The storm echoed it. I heard it. Ethan looked again at the compass on the table, feeling suddenly small in a way that was not uncomfortable, only humbling. I did not realize storms could do that. Not all storms, Sarai said. Only the ones that remember. She stepped back from the window and turned toward him fully. Your shelter is safe for now. The next wave is slower. I can stay until it passes. She offered the words with a calm certainty that warmed the room more than the heater ever could. Ethan nodded, unable to hide a faint smile. I would like that. Sarai's markings brightened, not in a dramatic flare but in a quiet, almost imperceptible acknowledgement, as if her body answered for her. She settled near the cot, her posture relaxed, her eyes reflecting the soft lights of the shelter. Ethan took a seat across from her, the compass resting between them like a small, shared point of understanding. Outside, the storm continued its slow electric dance across the dunes, but inside, something gentler had begun to settle, a quiet that felt less like silence and more like connection. Ian listened to the quiet thrum of the storm against the metal walls while Sarai sat near the cot, her posture upright yet relaxed, as if she belonged in this small human shelter more naturally than he did. The soft light from the overhead fixture glowed across her features, catching the faint shimmer in her skin and the gentle ebb of the markings along her arms. For a few breaths, neither of them spoke. The silence did not feel empty. It felt intentional, like a bridge forming between two worlds that had never meant to overlap. Ethan shifted slightly, the compass still resting on the table between them. Sarai's eyes drifted to it again, not with suspicion but with quiet wonder. You said it reminded you of someone, she murmured. Ethan nodded. My mother. She used to take me hiking when I was a kid. Long trails, open sky, fresh air. She said the compass was not for direction, not really. She said it was for courage. Something to hold when you felt lost. Sarai absorbed his words with that same attentive stillness she always had, her eyes soft but alert. Courage, she repeated, as if tasting the meaning of the word. That is a heavy thing for something so small. Ethan smiled faintly. Most important things are. Sarai lowered her gaze, her fingers brushing a faint line of glowing markings on her forearm, tracing them slowly. My people do not carry objects for memory, she said. We carry moments. Moments stay with us even when we move. Like your traveling paths, Ethan said. She nodded. Like our paths. She looked up. Again, her silver eyes reflecting the warm light of the shelter. But I have never carried a moment with someone who is not Arvan. Ethan felt something shift inside him, a warmth he had not expected, quiet but unmistakable. The storm outside pulsed softly, blue light blooming across the window like slow-moving water. Sarai's gaze followed the pattern, then drifted back to him. When I heard your worry, she said, I followed it. That is not something I have done before. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, unsure what to do with the weight of her honesty. I did not realize anyone could hear something like that. Not here, Sarai corrected gently. Feel. Another quiet hum rolled across the dunes outside, but the inside of the shelter remained warm, grounded, still. Ethan leaned slightly forward, elbows resting on his knees. What did it feel like? She considered that for a moment. It felt like a map drawn in emotion instead of lines. A direction that was not about travel, but about connection. Ethan exhaled, a slow breath that seemed to ease something tight in his chest. I have never thought of it that way. Sarai tipped her head. Do all humans hold their feelings so tightly? Sometimes, Ethan admitted. We try to protect them. Sarai's gaze softened. Even from kindness. The question landed with surprising precision. Ethan looked at the compass again, the crack along the glass catching the faint light. I guess I have been doing that without realizing it. For the first time, Sarai shifted closer, not crossing the space fully, but enough that the distance felt smaller. The glow of her markings warmed in tone, almost like an instinctive response to the change. Ethan, she said softly, you are not lost. The words were simple, but they settled deep, steadying him in a way he could not explain. He met her gaze, feeling the stormlight flicker across both of them. How can you tell? She looked at him with a calm certainty that held no judgment. Because you knew to follow the storm, she said. And the storm brought you here. The shelter seemed to hum in approval, the generator's low vibration merging with the soft pulse of the wind outside. Sarai drew in a slow breath, almost as if mirroring his steadiness. The next wave will quiet soon, she added. But I can stay a little longer, if you wish. Ethan did not hesitate this time. Yes, he said. I would like that. Sarai's markings glowed in a gentle, warm rhythm, as if answering his words without sound. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something in the quiet shift from loneliness to presence, from uncertainty to something that almost felt like trust. Ethan noticed the storm had softened to a low, steady hum, the kind that wrapped around the shelter without pressing in. The quiet inside felt warmer than before, stretched between him and Sarai like a thin, bright thread. She sat with her hands resting lightly on her knees, her posture calm but alert, as if listening to something beyond the walls. The glow of her markings flickered in gentle rhythms that matched the shifting light outside. Ethan studied her for a moment, not wanting to disturb whatever she was sensing. Is something wrong? He asked finally, keeping his voice soft. Sarai did not answer right away. Her gaze was steady, focused somewhere past the metal wall, following something he could not hear. The wind is changing, she said. The storm is not finished. It is thinking. Ethan blinked. Storms can think. She turned her head toward him, a faint smile touching her expression, subtle but unmistakably real. Not in the way you mean. The wind carries echoes, patterns, warnings. It shifts when there is something it wants to reveal. Ethan followed her gaze toward the window, even though his human senses could not detect anything unusual. All he saw were the soft waves of blue light drifting across the dunes. What is it trying to reveal? He asked. Sarai's markings dimmed slightly. You. Ethan's breath caught. Me. Your intentions, she said simply. Your why? The wind listens when a heart is uncertain. Ethan lowered his eyes to the compass on the table. The cracked glass reflected both of them, distorted but together in the same shard of light. I guess I have been uncertain for a while, he admitted. About my place out here. About what I am doing. About everything. Sarai rose with slow, fluid grace, crossing the small distance between them with steps so quiet they barely disturbed the air. She stopped at the edge of the table, her fingers hovering above the compass without touching it. Your presence carries weight, she murmured. Not heavy, just important. But you carry it alone. Ethan looked up at her. You make it sound like that is unusual. Sarai tilted her head. Among humans, perhaps not. Among my kind, it would be. Her pacing shifted slightly, a small gesture that seemed instinctive. The Arvin moved together. We listen together. A path is not walked alone unless you choose it. Ethan exhaled slowly. I did not choose it. It just happened. Sarai studied his face with quiet patience. Then why do you not let someone walk beside you? Ethan opened his mouth, but the answer did not come easily. He had spent so much time working in isolation, living in far-off research stations, drifting from assignment to assignment. He had not thought about companionship, not really. Sarai seemed to sense his hesitation. She softened, her glow warming a fraction. It is not a failure, she said. To want someone near you. The room felt smaller then, not in a suffocating way, but in a way that made the air feel more present, more shared. Ethan leaned back slightly, absorbing her words. What about you? He asked. Do the Arvin ever walk alone? Her eyes lowered. The glow along her arms dimmed in a slow wave. Only when something changes, she said quietly. when a voice in the storm does not sound like our own. Ethan studied her expression, trying to understand. Are you saying that voice was mine? Sarai lifted her gaze to meet his. Her eyes reflected the shelter's warm lights with an almost crystalline clarity. I am saying, she whispered, that your presence is not silent. And I am listening. The storm outside pulsed again, the faint rumble moving across the dunes like a heartbeat syncing with the room. Ethan felt something shift between them, subtle but unmistakable, something fragile and unforced. Sarai lowered herself to sit again, this time a little closer than before, her posture open, her expression steady. Tell me, she said softly, what does your heart fear most? The question settled into the warm quiet like a gentle weight, and Ethan realized she was not asking out of curiosity. She was asking because she intended to walk that path with him, even if only for this moment. If Ian did not answer right away, the question lingered between them, warm and heavy, like a breath held too long. Sarai waited with the same stillness she always carried, but there was something gentler in her expression now, something open. The soft glow of her markings reflected across the metal table, brushing faint light over the cracked compass that lay between them. Ethan exhaled slowly. I think, he began, his voice quiet, I fear disappearing. Sarai's head tilted just slightly, her attention sharpening. Not dying, Ethan clarified. Just disappearing into places like this. Stations no one visits. Assignments that do not matter. Work that never ends and never leads anywhere. He rubbed his thumb over the edge of the compass. I worry that one day I will realize I spent my whole life wandering without ever being found. Sarai absorbed his confession with a calm, steady gaze. Her hands rested on her knees, relaxed but attentive, as if receiving something fragile. Your fear is not emptiness, she said softly. It is longing. Ethan looked up, meeting her silver eyes. She continued, her voice low, melodic. Longing to be seen, to be understood, to know your presence changes something. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest ease, not fully, but enough to breathe more clearly. Does that sound foolish to you? Her markings warmed, shifting to a gentle gold-blue glow. No, she said. It sounds human. The storm outside pulsed again, a deeper roll this time, echoing faintly across the shelter. Ethan turned instinctively toward the window, but Sarai remained focused on him, her expression sharpening with a subtle unease. The wind is warning, she murmured. Ethan frowned. Warning about what? She stood slowly, listening. The air in the shelter shifted with her movement, as if the space itself reacted. There is a break in the storm, she said. A moment where the wind calms before something stronger arrives. Ethan rose to his feet. Is it dangerous? Sarai did not answer immediately. She stepped toward the window, her palm hovering just above the glass as she traced the faint vibrations running through it. Not dangerous, she said, but decisive. The words settled into the room with unexpected weight. Ethan watched her closely. Decisive how? Her glow brightened, reflecting the blue light drifting outside. Whatever you choose in this calm, she said, the wind will carry forward. Ethan tried to interpret her meaning, but before he could speak, a sudden flicker rippled across the window. Not lightning, not stormlight, something else. A distortion in the dunes, a shift in the horizon line, so subtle he almost thought he imagined it. Sarai drew in a slow breath. Something is approaching. Ethan's heart tightened. Another storm? No. She stepped back from the window, her expression poised, listening. A silence. Ethan did not understand, not fully, but he trusted her senses. Should we stay inside, he asked. Sarai turned toward him, and for the first time since he had met her, there was tension in her posture, controlled but unmistakable. You may need to, she said. But her eyes brightened, reflecting a new pattern of light from the window, one Ethan could not see yet. I must go out to meet it. Meet what? Ethan asked, moving closer. What is it? Sarai looked at him, and her voice softened with something like regret. The wind is calling my name. Ethan felt the compass in his hand grow heavier. The storm quieted further, unnaturally calm. Sarai stepped toward the door, her markings glowing brighter with each breath, as if answering some distant, invisible summons. I will return, she said quietly, if the wind allows it. Ethan reached out instinctively, not touching her, but stopping just before she moved beyond his grasp. Sarai, She paused, her voice low. "Do not fear the silence," she said. "It is only the space where choices echo." And before he could say another word, she lifted her hand to the door panel, and the shelter filled with the cold breath of the waiting storm as she stepped out into the blue-lit night. Ailen stood frozen at the doorway long after Sarai disappeared into the blue-lit haze, the cold wind pushing against his face like a reminder that she was no longer beside him. The shelter's warm air spilled outward in a thin veil, but the storm's breath swallowed it instantly, folding it back into the dunes. He stepped out just far enough to see the faint imprint of her footsteps fading into the glowing dust. Then the wind shifted again, carrying a low hum that felt different from the earlier pulses. This one was deeper, steadier, almost ceremonial. Ailen tightened his grip on the compass, its cold brass biting against his palm. Every instinct told him to stay inside, to trust what she said. But another part of him, something quieter and heavier, urged him forward. He stopped at the threshold. Beyond it, the air moved strangely. The storm was not violent now. It was arranged, structured. The dunes glowed in gentle waves that bent toward a single point on the horizon, as if the world itself leaned in that direction. Ailen whispered her name. Sarai. The wind carried the sound away before it reached the ridge. He stepped back inside and closed the door, the latch sealing with a soft click that echoed louder than it should have. The shelter felt emptier than before. He moved to the window, pressing his palm lightly to the glass. The faint vibrations pulsed under his fingers in a rhythm that was almost like breathing. Then he saw it. Not Sarai herself, but a glow. A soft vertical line of light rising from the dunes, shifting in patterns that matched the markings along her arms. It pulsed once, twice, then branched into 3 separate arcs, each one bending gracefully toward the ground. Ailen recognized the shape, though he had only ever seen sketches and distant readings. A calling spire, Arvan's signal patterns. The storm was not summoning Sarai. They were her people, or something older than her people. The compass in his hand suddenly felt too heavy. He stared at its cracked glass, watching the faint reflection of the spire dance across it. He thought of her words. "The wind is calling my name." He thought of her glow, the shift in her posture, the certainty in her voice. She had not been afraid, but she had been resigned. A low thrum moved through the floor, so subtle he might have missed it if he had not been watching the spire. The arcs of light bent inward, contracting like a heartbeat. Ailen felt something tighten in his chest. "Sarai, what is happening out there?" As if in answer, the compass vibrated faintly in his hand. He frowned, lifting it closer to the light. It was impossible. The compass had been dead for months. But the needle trembled, once, then twice, before settling into a slow, deliberate movement. It pointed not north, not anywhere the magnetic grid recognized. It pointed directly toward the glowing spire. Ailen stared at it, his breath catching. "You cannot be serious." The needle twitched again, firmer this time, as if insisting. Ailen exhaled, the fog of his breath brushing the cold glass. He looked from the compass to the spire, then to the door. "She said to stay inside." He muttered. Another pulse of light arced from the spire, brighter than before. The needle jerked sharply toward it. "And you are telling me to do the opposite." He paced once, twice, the weight of the decision settling over him. He could wait. He could trust she would return. But the storm's silence felt wrong. Too controlled. Too expectant. He thought of the moment they shared. Her calm certainty, her honest eyes, her voice echoing with something more than logic. And he knew. Waiting was not what the wind wanted, or what Sarai needed. Ailen grabbed his jacket, zipped it up tight, and stepped toward the door. He pressed the panel. Cold air rushed in instantly, carrying the distant hum of the spire. "All right," he whispered to the compass. "Just do not let me disappear." Then he stepped out into the glowing silence, following the needle as it pulled him toward the horizon where Sarai had vanished moments before. Ailen moved across the glowing dunes with the storm's silence wrapped around him like a thin shell, the compass needle pulling him forward with a steady insistence that felt almost alive. Each step pressed faint prints into the shimmering dust, only for the wind to smooth them over seconds later, as if erasing any sign that he had ever been there. The calling spire rose taller with every stride, its arcs of light bending inward, folding and unfolding like the slow beat of a giant, luminescent heart. Ailen's breath fogged in the cold, the air sharp but strangely calm, as if the storm held itself back to allow his passage. He clutched the compass tighter. The needle no longer trembled. It pointed straight ahead with unwavering clarity. "I hear you," Ethan murmured to the empty air, though he did not know if he meant the compass, the storm, or whatever force had summoned Sarai. The closer he drew, the more the air shifted. Not colder, not warmer, just expectant. When he reached the ridge, the dunes opened into a shallow basin, lit by the arcs of the spire. And at its center stood Sarai. She faced the light with her back to him, her markings glowing brighter than he had ever seen, trailing soft radiance across the ground beneath her feet. Her posture was calm but straight, composed in a way that looked almost ceremonial. Ethan stepped forward, careful not to disturb the delicate quiet. "Sarai," he called softly. She turned slowly. Her eyes reflected the shifting arcs of the spire, filled with something deep, ancient, and steady. "You followed the storm," she said. Ethan held up the compass. "It followed you first." Her gaze lowered to the object in his hand, and her expression softened with something like understanding. "The wind carried your fear," she said, "but it also carried your choice." Ethan stepped closer until the glow from her markings warmed the air between them. "What is happening?" Sarai looked back at the spire, her voice gentle. "A calling, a remembrance. The storm listens for those who have walked with uncertainty." "Like you?" he asked. She met his eyes, and for the first time he saw something vulnerable beneath her calm. "Like both of us." The arcs of light pulsed in a slow rhythm that felt almost like breathing. Sarai extended her hand toward the spire, palm open. "This light is not from my people," she said. "It is older. It calls when a path must change." Ethan's chest tightened. "Change how?" She looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "By choosing who you walk with." The storm rumbled faintly, not loud, just enough to echo the weight of the moment. Ethan moved closer to her side. "I walked out here because I did not want you to face whatever this is alone." Sarai's markings brightened, a soft wave of silver and blue rolling across her shoulders. "Then you have already answered the wind." She took one step toward him, closing the space between them until the glow from her skin reflected off the cracked compass in his hand. "Ethan," she said, her voice steady, "the wind carried your fear, but it also carried your courage. And it carried your presence to me." Ethan swallowed gently, feeling the compass warm in his grip as the spire's light wrapped around them both. "Does that mean you will stay?" Her eyes softened with a warmth he had never seen from her before. "It means," she whispered, "that I understand why your moments matter." The wind rose in a soft rush, circling them, lifting grains of glowing dust into the air. The spire dimmed slowly, folding its light back into the dunes as if acknowledging a choice made. Sarai lifted her hand and placed it gently over Ethan's, closing his fingers around the compass. The glow from her markings reflected across the cracked glass in shimmering arcs. Neither spoke as the stormlight faded into the quiet horizon. The silence between them was not empty. It was full, and in that stillness, Ethan felt something settle inside him, gentle and sure. Not direction, not certainty, something deeper. A presence that did not vanish when the wind changed. A quiet that felt like being seen. The kind of moment his mother would have told him to keep. And he knew, as the storm finally exhaled around them, that he was no longer walking alone.